Welcome to the vast void of a famous photo. Paul Bolcik here today, July 1st, 2023, the 160th anniversary of the first day's battle at Gettysburg. We're going to talk today about the famous Brady and Company photo of 3 Confederate prisoners on Seminary Ridge that was photographed almost 160 years ago. The 3 Confederate prisoners at Gettysburg, published in the June 2023 Military Images magazine cover story. Welcome to the vast void of a famous photo. Just a recap from the last video Eric Davis and I had done about the Byerly famous photograph taken on North Market Street. This was something that fell through my hand like sand through your fingers that I had seen back in year 2017 and forgot to add it to the magazine article. A snippet from the July 20th, Wednesday, Frederick Examiner newspaper, which is the smoking gun evidence that the famous Confederate Frederick Market Street photo was affected on the 9th of July, 1864. But the alternative of sack, pillage, and all the consequences of litigious and brutal soldiery let loose upon a defenseless community was presented for failure or hesitation to comply with the freebooters' demand. And a meeting of citizens, including several respectable Union men, were hastily summoned to consider the exigency. During the consultation, a regiment of filthy traitors was drawn up in array to enforce the demand, and the reader can well imagine that under such a menace there was no dissenting voice. So there you have it, the smoking gun evidence, a regiment of the filthy traitors. Now, the photo spot was within a home run hit baseball distance of 4 out of the 5 banks that paid the ransom demand payment. The 5th bank was a distance of an out of the stadium smashing windshield baseball hit distance. So there you go, the smoking evidence on the Frederick Confederate photo. Now, back to the Military Images magazine. Publishes great stories 4 times a year. Can't say enough good things about Ron Coddington, Kurt Luther, and their staff, with great stories in Military Images magazine once a season. Also, Kurt Luther down in Blacksburg, Virginia. Virginia Tech has created Civil War photo facial sleuth, an aid in identifying the names of lost Civil War soldiers in photography portraits. So one of the things I like to do is I am a photo sleuther. I like looking at older photos from the 1840s through the early 1900s. One of my favorites from a Daguerrean yearbook, courtesy of Dennis O. Williams, a friend of mine. This photograph, a daguerreotype out of Louisiana. 1855-56 era, a young African-American charge. Interesting photo. Maybe in his lap what is known as a gree-gree bag, hoodoo voodoo amulet. Could be there, might not be there. It's hard to say. Gree-gree bags were adorned with shells, buttons, amulets, filled with things like heads of snakes, lizard gizzards, and things way past telling. Don't know if that is there in this image, but interesting. Another one, a photo of Lawrence Toomey Pollen. This was a soldier that fought in the U.S. War with Nicaragua, 1855 to 1857. Herb Peck Jr. had this image for 30 years. When he gave me a photocopy of it, I could spot the Colt revolver hidden in Lawrence Toomey Pollen's belt. You can see the barrel and the hammer of the revolver, probably a 5-shot 31 caliber. But interesting, nobody had ever seen that before until I was able to photo sleuth it. So in my search for anything related to the Matthew Brady and Company for this 10-year investigation of the famous photo of the 3 prisoners, I came across the photo here on the left from a Smithsonian webpage. And after looking at this supposed photo of Civil War soldiers, I realized that this photo was in fact not a genuine photo taken during the time period of 1861 to 65. So I emailed President of Center for Civil War Photography, Mr. Bob Zeller, and said, hey, take a look at this. he emailed me in return and said, "How could it be a fake? It's on a stereo card." Well, the bottom line was the stereo card was not produced until the decade of the 1880s. So this was a photograph, certainly, of Civil War recreators, men that were probably aged 5, 6 years old when the Civil War was happening. They collected Civil War surplus, threw a sheet over some sticks, and had a Civil War campfire photo scene. Made a great story in the Battlefield Photographer magazine. So this is Matthew Brady. His two associates, Anthony Berger and David B. Woodbury, worked at his Washington, D.C. gallery. Brady spent most of his time at his Broadway gallery and would visit the Washington, D.C. gallery during the war years occasionally. So there was a plan hatched by telegraph where Berger and Woodbury would meet Brady at the Battle of Gettysburg once the battle became world news. So they planned on a rendezvous on the field, which took place later. Now, Berger took probably the most famous photograph from the years of the Civil War. That was seen by more people worldwide in the 20th century than any photograph from the conflict. The photograph of Lincoln that was taken in the D.C. gallery in year 1864 on the $5 U.S. currency, seen by people the globe over. So this is the first indication that Brady had published photographs after his return from Gettysburg. This from the 1863 August 7th New York Times newspaper. Photographs by Brady has published a series of 14 photographic views of Gettysburg, which has now become an historic place and its vicinity, the battlegrounds, the spot where Reynolds fell, and other localities of interest. The views are artistically excellent, of course, correct, and the series forms an interesting and valuable collection. Laughing gas. Oh, that's a different story, but reminds me of the 1799 London parties where laughing gas was all the rage. Now, Brady had taken over 30 photographs from his trip to Gettysburg, and the 3 Confederate prisoners made the best of, which was a cut of 14 stereo cards that they produced with older, outdated year 1862 older cardstock stamping. Now, in August of 1863, Colonel Lucian Fairchild of the 2nd Wisconsin Infantry took a wound at the Battle of Gettysburg, having an arm amputated. When he recovered in Washington, D.C., he purchased a set of the 14 brandly new issued stereo cards. So, on the reverse of the Fairchild collected stereo card, written in period ink, "Rebel prisoners behind their breastworks." This is an indication that Brady and crew, in all likelihood, did not get the names of the 3 Confederates that they had photographed. So this tells me that only weeks after the fact, it's highly unlikely that they recorded their names. So, on August 22nd, 1863, Harper's Weekly newspaper, 11 of Brady & Company's stereo photographs appeared. First, they had to be reproduced as woodcuts. Then the woodcuts would be reproduced as steel engravings, all by the artists that worked with the newspaper. So each steel engraved image could come down and stamp each news sheet that was fed through the press. Now, unfortunately, the 3 Confederate prisoners image did not make the cut in Harper's Weekly newspaper. If it had, it's possible that later on, when Billy Yank and Johnny Reb traded coffee and tobacco along with each other's side of the war newspapers during little informal truces, it's possible that the 3 Confederate prisoners may have been discovered because the newspaper may have been passed around in the South through short trades or short truces. So this is a later Anthony and Company stereo card of the 3 prisoners post-war. Anthony was right on Broadway, just doors down from Brady's photographic studio. During the Civil War, the Anthony Company, Edward and Henry, 2 brothers, produced everything that photographers would have wanted in those days: cameras, lenses, paper equipment, chemicals, anything you needed to produce photographs. They had it, they would sell it. So this is how you view a stereo card, through a handheld glass viewer. This is a fancy model with a tripod, courtesy of the Smithsonian Institute. So in this effect, the viewer could view the photograph in three-dimensional form. That's where the word stereo comes from. So the first time the three Confederate prisoners was reproduced in book form was from 1894, Williams' Memorial War Book. Williams was a veteran of the war, having served in the 5th New York, Der Zouaves, wounded at Williamsburg, and later in the Wilderness. Toward the end of the year, or toward the end of the war, he became a war correspondent. Later in life, he got into the publishing business. So the three Confederate prisoners was reproduced on a page with a conglomerate of other images from Gettysburg, Meade's headquarters, Lee's headquarters. So the image was produced very small. In year 1880, a New York City newspaper was the first in the world to reproduce photographs in what was known as the half-dot tone method. So before 1880, all the reproductions had to be through woodcuts and steel engravings. But the half-dot tone method invented in year 1880, and this is the first time the image appeared in a book. Now, unfortunately, the three Confederates appeared very small. The veterans of the war, their eyesight is fading, they're getting older. Nobody came forth in that era to say who any of the three individuals were. Later, 1911, the 50th anniversary of the start of the Civil War. Trevelyan Miller's 10-volume series, Photo History of the War. The photo of the three Confederate prisoners appeared in volume 1. So, the 1913 Gettysburg 50th anniversary reunion. They invited veterans from all across the land. Whether you served as a naval sailor during the war, it didn't matter. If you did not serve at the Battle of Gettysburg, they invited everybody that was a war veteran from any theater of the war to please come to the 50th anniversary Gettysburg reunion. Now, it is not recorded or written that any of these veterans were talking about the Brady and Company photograph. Most likely they didn't know about it. If they lived down south, few books down south after the era of Reconstruction. The Northerners, like I said, the photo was printed so small that it's unrecognizable, basically. So, later Civil War era reunions. As time moves toward the future, the veterans are aging and getting older. Nobody stepped forward to talk anything about the famous Brady and Company photograph. So in that era, it was probably little known. After Miller's, it wasn't really reproduced in any kind of books after Miller's, so the image stayed rather small. So we come to the 1950s, when the image was first reproduced as a full page in the classic Divided We Fought from 1953. Other volumes followed throughout the decade of the 1950s until the Civil War centennial, when the photo starts to become a smash hit that it is in the modern era. William Frazanito, genius. First book published 1975, A Journey in Time. This is one of Bill's favorite photos here before he went to the conflict in Southeast Asia, photographed with President Eisenhower. So, the three Confederate prisoners appeared in Journey in Time, where Bill Frazanito used his mapping skills to pinpoint the exact location of the three prisoners. His magnum opus, Early Photography at Gettysburg, pictured at the right. The photograph did not appear in that volume because he had already covered it in Journey in Time. The other two volumes, good magazine books that you can use for touring the battlefield. So my Park Service map here, showing the location of the three prisoners. If you look to the view at the right, is a more enlarged area of near the seminary, Lutheran Seminary Hospital. The spot of the three Confederate prisoners photo was just across Seminary Ridge Avenue from the letter M on my map here, which was across the street from the Henry Thompson house. So, Henry's mom, the widow Thompson, had occupied this dwelling, which was constructed in year 1834, originally owned by 3 different individuals, men, and one of those men, Clarkson, bought out the other 2 guys. He was a good friend of Pennsylvania politician Thaddeus Stevens, who worked on Capitol Hill for a number of years. Pictured at left, Tim Smith, great historian from Gettysburg, published a book, The History of Lee's Headquarters, a lot of great information in that book. So, on the cover of the book, one version, a Brady and Company photograph of the widow Thompson house. On the right, another version, also taken by Brady and Company. Brady is hidden in between the bean stalks or the arbor there. The widow Thompson seated next to a Brady employee. So the photographic spot of the 3 prisoners was just behind the camera, where the Brady cameraman had placed the camera to take the view on the right. So in year 2006, Timothy Smith, Gettysburg historian in residence, had noted from different collections a more expanded version of the 3 prisoners paper print, one in the Gilder Lerman collection, New York Public Library, showing more of the detail on both the left and the right. So what we see on the right is the original stone wall that was constructed in the 1830s after the completion of the Lutheran Seminary. The wall existed there on the 1st of July, the day that the battle began. We know this because Abner Small, a soldier from Maine, described in memoirs clambering over certain stone walls on the top of Seminary Ridge. Now, one of the interesting things in the image, an unknown item, also goes back to the vast void of a famous photo. An unknown object. Could it be a wintertime sled for pulling firewood? A grave wooden headboard constructed for one of the thousands of casualties that may have been slain during the battle? Is it possibly the headboard for Alex P. Alcorn, soldier in Cooper's Pennsylvania Artillery Battery, who fought right in this vicinity on the morning and midday of July 1st, 1863? The Confederates later overran the Union positions. Interesting story about his older brother, James Alcorn, that buried the brother there on this, or near this spot, on the 2nd day of July, now a prisoner of war because the Confederates had captured him. He stayed behind to try to keep his brother alive. Brother expired on July 2nd. His memoirs talk about how he hastily buried the brother, then returned with his father on the 7th of July, 1863, got back home to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, went back to the area. He could not find the headboard. The headboard was then buried under the Confederate created breastworks. So this tells us that the breastworks were not there on the 2nd of July. The stone wall was there. It may have had a massive hole in it created by a Confederate artillery fire. It may have been created by escaping batteries. Union artillerymen may have made a gap in the wall to get their artillery pieces through on the vast retreat from the Confederate onslaught on the afternoon of July 1st. So, I've been working on this project about 10 years now. Back in year 2013, I contacted Bill Frazanito by snail mail. He replied, regarding the Brady photo of the 3 Confederate prisoners at Gettysburg, I too have long been puzzled by the odd collection of lumber at that site. But regardless of the lumber's origin, the specific site and approximate date on or about July 15th, 1863 are firmly established. So the mystery concerning the lumber continues. What's fascinating is that the lumber most likely is from a dismantled log structure. Now, nobody from Adams County submitted a property damage claim after the fact about any outbuildings destroyed or dismantled during the fighting. So it is most likely that the origins of most of the lumber we see in the images are logs that may have come from the tapeworm railroad construction in the 1830s, or a dismantled shoe shop that was about 200 yards west of the photo spot. Now, these are memoirs from Abner Small, adjutant, 16th Maine volunteer. He says, on the 1st of July, our brigade went around to the western face of the Lutheran seminary, and there we threw up a barricade of fence rails and anything else that was handy. The barricade took the shape of a crescent bending to the west. So he also talks about his regiment moving around on the afternoon of July 1st at many different positions during that July 1st battle. He clambered over stone walls on the crest of the Lutheran seminary. So we know that the stone wall was there and existed from probably the mid-1830s, 30 years before the battle at Gettysburg in July of 1863. So this is just a map here from the book on the right, a book my friend Harry Fans authored, great historian, sadly passed away. Anyway, you can see the crescent of breastworks on the western side of the Lutheran seminary. So it's possible that the Union troops may have found remains of the housing quarters for the workers that were going to construct what was known later as the Tapeworm Railroad. It's possible that Thaddeus Stevens, who owned the Whitto Thompson house, he believed one day in the future that the railroad would finally go through. So there would have been an incentive to save the structures that would have been workers' quarters or quarters that held the blasting gunpowder that made the massive railroad cuts that are known from the first day's battle at Gettysburg. So here is some imagery about and information about the failed Tapeworm Railroad project. This was a little bit like the bridge in Alaska, the bridge to nowhere. So this railroad did not go through. There was huge infrastructure built. The nickname Tapeworm Railroad came from Stevens' enemies and detractors. Other civilians in Pennsylvania from different areas of the state did not want to put the tax dollars or fund a project that was going to connect with the C&O Canal and the state of Maryland. So, the tapeworm named for two reasons. One, it was sucking funds out of areas of Pennsylvania that didn't want to support the project. Number two, the route of the railroad had many switchbacks, was going to cross over the South Mountain passes. So, when the battle begins on July 1st, there are massive railroad cuts where there is no railroad track in the bottom of the cut. We can see here on the left a Tyson Brothers August 1863 image showing the area to the right of the Chambersburg Pike looking toward the west. You can see the massive gap. The view on the right is a post-war photo when the railroad finally was laid in the bed of the existing route. Now, when the railroad was laid down finally in the middle 1880s, it did not follow the entire route of the Tapeworm Railroad. The railroad line left Gettysburg and went to Chambersburg instead of going toward the C&O Canal. Some parts of the Tapeworm Railroad had track laid in the state of Maryland. Some of that line became the Western Maryland Railroad. So, another Brady and Company image, probably taken on the same day as the three prisoners photo. Here we see a view of the Lutheran Seminary with a Brady employee straddling the fence, looking uphill toward the yard of the seminary. We can see the hospital tents from all of the wounded that were later brought to the seminary to recover. What's very interesting about this photo is it's never been pointed out in any book that I know of. Way up on the hill, in the nosebleed, we can see three Pennsylvania musicians that were detailed as nurses and orderlies to look after the wounded. So we can see the tom-tom drum strung over the soldier's shoulder, standing at the right there. Very interesting image. Another early image of the Lutheran Seminary, August 1863, Tyson Brothers image. So we can see the Confederate artillery battery positions that were created when the artillerymen removed the slats in the fence, piled them up in certain sections to park their cannons behind. So the mouth of the cannons would have been pointing toward us, the viewer of this photo. It's possible that some of the wood was removed to feed the patient's food for cook fire. So maybe some of the rails were removed from the stacks before this photo from mid-August 1863. Now, what's interesting in the photo of the three prisoners, down at their feet on the ground, we can see two massive square beams. These beams, most likely the roof support beams. As you can imagine a crossbar in the letter A from the alphabet. That crossbar would be like the roof support beam. So, in between the time of the battle, the roof beams were probably on the top of the breastworks that the Confederates created. They removed them, a civilian, somebody, after the battle and in between the time of the photo on July 15th. The beams now will be used to repair damaged houses or barns. We can see on the right an image of the Stock Inn, still stands today on Washington Street in Gettysburg. This inn was hit by Union artillery fire to dislodge the Confederate sharpshooters, which were sheltered in the attic. So the breastworks, created with dirt, logs, probably dragged from the Union breastworks, which were never photographed. So most likely what happened was the Confederates dragged and carried the logs about 100, 200 yards distance to the spot of the photo of the three prisoners spot, which was an artillery position for Carter's Virginia Battery, King William Artillery from Virginia. So in my quest to find everything I could about the photo of the three prisoners, I had to understand if there were any other photographs taken of that spot during the July-August 1863 time period. So sure enough, Philadelphia photographer Frederick Gutekunst made two exact photographs from the same camera tripod position along the Chambersburg Pike, looking west toward the Seminary Ridge. So on the right of the photo, you can see the Tapeworm Railroad cut. To the left, you can see the Lutheran Seminary. Now, what's interesting is he took two identical photographs from this same camera tripod position. One had Assistant Mr. Marshall standing in the Chambersburg Pike, attired in a duster. The other did not. So, what was fascinating to me about this was I took a trip to the Pennsylvania Gettysburg College to view the original paper photo print with Mr. Marshall standing in the image. And the most bizarre thing, when viewing from a distance the area where the three prisoners stood up on Seminary Ridge, you can see the stone wall along the crest that was created in the 1830s. So the tree that the Brady cameramen were underneath has a strange optical illusion or some other thing that I did not understand. It appears to be the roof line of a house. Or if it's not, it's possible that the Confederates could have constructed a flag-waving platform or a viewing platform for General Robert E. Lee. Lee is in this area where his headquarters are for 3 days of the battle. There is zero evidence that General Lee ever went to the roof of the seminary cupola to view Union positions. Again, the key words here are zero credible evidence. Lee never entered the building. He would have needed an hour of time to do this, 20 minutes to go to the top of the roof, 10 minutes to view Union positions, 20 minutes to get back down. So it's not in the interest of the Lutherans to show an enemy leader, even the famous General Lee, to the roof of the cupola. Another thing we have to understand is that Lee was suffering from diarrhea during the 3 days of the battle. He is not going to enter the Lutheran seminary because if he has an emergency, he doesn't want to be halfway up the building and have to figure out where to go. So, this return note from Bill Frazanito from September 18th, year 2022. He says, the background details in both versions of the Gudikun scene are identical, including the strange object or optical illusion in the lone tree. That tree is likely the same tree under which the Brady cameramen recorded the three prisoners. It's the camera that's under the tree, not the three prisoners. So, something else that might be able to help, I will have to examine it in detail in the future, is the famous James Walker painting that was released in year 1870, depicting the July 1st, first day's battle at Gettysburg. It might be able to show me some of the buildings that might be the roof that created the optical illusion in the Gudikun's photo. Maybe a job for Timothy Smith, Gettysburg in residence, best historian. So what we see in the painting are various structures. The Widow Thompson house, the Henry James Thompson barn on the other side of Chambersburg Pike. Walker was a veteran of the U.S. War with Mexico. He did excellent paintings of U.S. War with Mexico battle scenes. He did 2 monumental paintings of the Battle of Gettysburg. And for this, he did year 1868 surveys where he traveled around with Batchelder, the map maker. So, the buildings in this painting are probably fairly accurate because only 4 years' time has elapsed since the battle. Maybe things had not changed that much in 4 years. So now we're going to move on to who or exactly what of the 3 prisoners. Countless man hours or women hours have been spent trying to figure out who the 3 men are in the famous Brady and Company photo. September 12th, year 2017. I was looking at the photo one time for about the 298th time in my life, and it hit me like a sledgehammer. These 3 guys, I believe, are surgeons or assistant surgeons from the details that I could see in the photograph. So, a return letter from Bill Frazanito, November 24th, 2018. Frazanito says, in my opinion, there is nothing about their uniforms that would even suggest that they were anything but privates in an infantry unit. There is a basic problem with your theory, since CS surgeons were officers with the rank of major or colonel and wore uniforms consistent with their rank with the insignia of major on both the collar and the chicken guts on the sleeves. For an excellent example of a typical uniform worn by CS surgeons at Gettysburg, see Tyson Photo Firm Portrait of J.M. Hayes in my early photography of Gettysburg book. So we're going to look at a photo of J.M. Hayes and other Confederate surgeons in Lee's army that I was able to gather. So one of the great things I found was this 4-page memoir written by Assistant Surgeon Simon Baruch that was published in year 1914. If you can find it, get a hold of it. A great 4-page account where he says after they surrendered to the Union forces, they were left behind as surgeons and assistant surgeons after the battle. He says, our uniforms had ceased to indicate our rank as surgeons, and some of us wore civilian coats. Now, surgery's a dirty business. You're dealing with blood, excrement, vomit. So, there might be a reason why you don't want to get your fancy uniform trashed. Or it could be along the lines of these surgeons and assistant surgeons have respect for the buck privates that have to do the killing. The surgeons don't have to do the killing. Their job is to patch the soldiers up or heal them when they're sick. So everybody in a regiment knew who the surgeons were in the regiment. Maybe the surgeons did not want to assert any authority. They're not there to boss the private soldiers around. They're there to patch them up. So there you go. Now I'm going to show you why I believe these 3 unidentified individuals are surgeons or assistant surgeons. So we can see the blood stains soaked into the fingers above the fingernails of the man seated at left. Also, the haversack that he is attired in looks nothing like any haversack that I've ever seen looking at thousands of Civil War photos. It has a box or rectangular shape to the top of it, tin cup tied to the side. Most of the time when you see photos of haversacks, the tin cup is affixed to the strap in the dead center front of the bag. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of these medical kits that were known as jewelry boxes by the soldiers during the Civil War. A Confederate model photographed at left, courtesy of the National Civil War Medicine Medical Museum. Now, these surgeons' kits were civilian models that the surgeons and doctors had before the war began, that they brought to the war with them as their own personal possessions. Photographed at right, a manufactured government-issued surgeon kit that was debuted in year 1864, has a curve in it. Another photograph of the same exact surgeon's kit, this one coated with deer skin on the top. So the government asked these surgeons, how do you like to carry your bags? Well, we wear them right on the hip, just like from this photograph from the soldier seated on the logs at left. So we'll move on to the center man. What I observed was possibly a Catlin knife or bullet probe tool inside the jacket. Could be nothing there at all. Could be a writing ink pen, or maybe I'm just imagining the curves and the shadows in the jacket. But what I see here is a finger pincushion on the left pinky finger. Now I will show you what this is. It was a certain trade of individuals known as harness makers in the mid-1800s. The harness makers were a lot like Amco transmission workers. So you had your horsepower, your mule or your horse that pulled your wagon, which was your vehicle. Now, to transmit your horsepower, you needed lots of harnesses. Think of the Budweiser Clydesdales or the Jingle Bells Christmas song. These harness makers worked with two needles in each hand, as you can see from this horizontally transposed daguerreotype image. So the left pinky finger is adorned with this finger pincushion, a handy instrument that all these harness makers knew about, where you could jab the needle in, not to lose it, when you needed to do some other task of the process. So you can see the clam, which was the name of the wooden horse that the harness maker used to hold the piece of leather in. Another late 1850s ambrotype image of a harness maker. Also on the left pinky finger, we can see the finger pincushion here. So what I believe is that center man in the famous Brady and Company photograph adopted this unique and very handy little device of the finger pincushion that the harness maker industry used constantly in their line of work. So we're going to move on to the third man standing at right. What I believe I see when I really zoomed in and look at the details of this photograph could be a cloth medical bag hanging from the suspender strap. Now, this is certainly not a Union issued bullseye canteen, which also had ridges in the tin canteen. Not that. Certainly could be a cloth medical bag. So what I also see is, it looks to me like a knife in a sheath, which I do not believe is part of the suspender strap hanging down. What I think is that this knife scabbard was held by a belt, which is blocked by one of the soldiers' haversacks, and also by the overhanging coat or blanket strung over the shoulder. It appears to be some kind of frock coat, but that's a mystery also to me, part of the vast void of the famous photo. Now, what I also think I see is a ruler. You may not agree with me with any of this stuff, but this is just the things that I observed from September year 2017. So why would a surgeon need a ruler or measuring stick? So when you amputate a limb from a wounded victim, what you would have to do is make a cut in the arm or leg about 8 inches before you wanted to hack through the bone. And when you cut, you made a circular cut. And what you did was you peeled the skin back 8 inches before where you're going to hack through the bone. The reason you needed that extra skin, if you did not do that, your patient would bleed to death. So you do not want to screw that up. As a surgeon or assistant surgeon, you want to take exact measurements of how much skin that you need to cut and then roll back on your wounded patient. So a couple of examples here of a leather medical kit carried by a surgeon in the 10th Vermont Infantry. Photo courtesy of the National Civil War Medicine Medical Museum, Frederick, Maryland. Very similar to the cloth bag that the unknown man at right had standing there. Another thing about the knife on this man, infantry soldiers, artillery soldiers, cavalry soldiers, if they were captured, as 6,000 were by the Union forces during the Battle at Gettysburg, all knives would have been removed from those guys. Now a surgeon, that's a different ordeal. They know the surgeons need to do their job post-battle, so they would not molest the surgeons. They give surgeons free rein over what they need to do. Another thing, surgeons are considered non-combatants, so they will be freely exchanged after the battle. Another surgeon's kit, this one carried by a Union surgeon, courtesy also of the National Civil War Medical Museum, Frederick, Maryland. Almost looks like a infantry soldier's cartridge box. Is not, is a medical kit. Looks very similar. These are just different examples of types of surgeon's kits that I was able to try to figure out, maybe from the 3 prisoners. So we're going to talk about 3 big bugs that were taken to the Lutheran Seminary Hospital after the battle. Major General Isaac R. Trimble with Virginia and Maryland state connections. Excellent general. Brigadier General James L. Kemper. All 3 of these men wounded on the 3rd day's battle. Henry Kidd Douglas over near the Culp's Hill area. Kemper wounded during the great charge of Pettigrew, Pickett, Trimble. So let's take a look at some of the surgeons in Lee's army. Now that I've established that I want to find surgeons or assistant surgeons to possibly run the Civil War photo facial sleuth, I start hunting them down. So on my photo at left, Dr. Samuel Rush Sayers seated here in a wartime photo with his brother, who looks to appear as a sergeant. Anyway, Sayers there, a doctor, a major, seated at right. Clearly not any of the 3 men. Dr. John Samuel Apperson, 4th Virginia Infantry. Bingo! Could be my center man in the famous Brady Company photo. We'll take a better look at him later. He was tall, just like center man, has the same beard cut, post-war photo. His compatriot in the 4th Virginia Infantry, senior officer, Dr. Harvey Black, does not appear to be any of the 3 men when I took a good look. He also retreated with Lee's army after the fact and was not left behind or ordered to stay behind. Hunter Holmes McGuire also retreated with Lee's army. We know this now because Black left memoirs. He talks about Hunter Holmes McGuire retreating with him in his memoirs, letters to his wife that were later published in the modern era. Let's take a look at some more guys. On the top left, William Mabry Strickler, Extra Billy Smith's brigade, 52nd Virginia Infantry. I really like the eyes. Looks a lot like the man on right, but ears don't match, nose doesn't match. Thomas A. Means, Frank W. Patterson, John M. Hayes. Now, Hayes is the man that Frazanito referred to, the photo, dressed in the fancy uniform with the stars on the collar, black surgeon's trim on the sleeves, chicken guts also on the sleeves. These 3 photos of Means, Patterson, Hayes were taken by the Tyson Gettysburg photographic firm in August 1863. After the Confederates and Union wounded were all patched up. They certainly paid Yankee dollars to the Tyson firm to get their CDV card photos made. These 3 guys don't appear to be any of the 3 men. Let's move on. Thomas Young Abbey, Louisiana Washington Artillery Battalion. Doesn't appear to be any of the 3 guys. William H. Philpott, 4th Georgia Infantry. Could be center man, hard to say. Thomas C. Pugh, 9th Georgia Infantry, pre-war photograph, doesn't appear to be any of the 3 men. William R. Whitehead, great surgeon, 44th Virginia Infantry, has a big bottom part of his nose that doesn't appear to match any of the 3 guys. James F. Pierce, 8th South Carolina Infantry. Don't really know. Haven't done the photo facial sleuth. Samuel Brown Morrison, related to the great famous Stonewall Jackson. Samuel Brown Morrison's cousin, Anna Morrison, married Jackson. Doesn't appear to be any of the three guys. Irwin J. Eldridge, 16th Georgia Infantry. Don't think we have anything there. Lariston H. Hill, 53rd North Carolina Infantry. Looks very similar to the man standing at right. Post-war photo. We'll take another look at him later. Let's move on to some other guys. Benjamin F. Ward also left an account in Confederate Veteran Magazine, a 2-page account. Probably not Ward. He would have mentioned being photographed by Brady in that account. Unknown man, photographed at Byerly Frederick Studio. October 1862, post-Battle of Antietam. He went down to all the hospitals in Frederick, also paid Yankee dollars for his photograph. An unknown photo, now in the collection of the Library of Congress, found by or purchased by the Lillianquist family. Jacob Milton Hadley, captured on the retreat, West Virginia, certainly not there to be photographed by Brady and Company. James H. Southall, a painting made by James Walker. They lived in the same area in the state of Virginia. So, post-war painting done of Southall. Unfortunately, we don't have a photograph of him to compare. Looks a little bit like Center Man. Nose looks good. Abner Embry McGarity, 21st Georgia Infantry. Possibly could be man at right. Post-war photo. This is all we have. William T. Brewer, 43rd North Carolina Infantry. Doesn't appear to be any of the three guys. J.S.D. Cullen, 1st Virginia Infantry. Doesn't appear to be. Maybe. Haven't done the facial photo sleuth on him. Most of these guys, I have not done the photo facial sleuth. Been busy with putting the PowerPoint together and getting the magazine article ready for publication. Charles A. Ware, captured on the retreat. Certainly not any of the three men. Aristides Monterrey, Portuguese nobleman, later rode as a surgeon with Mosby late in the war. Certainly doesn't appear to be any of the three guys. Lafayette Guild was imprisoned at Fort McHenry. Chief Surgeon A&V. Doesn't appear to be any of the three guys. Now, one of the great stories in the memoir from Baruch was he talked about all of the beautiful women in Baltimore that showed up to see these surgeons that were in prison. So it's just like in today's world. Mothers tell their daughters, you have to date and marry the doctors. So they show up in droves at Fort McHenry. They bring them cake. They bring them ice cream. They bribe the Union guards so the surgeons can go on dates at nighttime with them. The Union guards open up the pen. Guild escaped. He didn't come back from his night of romancing. Went down to Lee's army, returns before the prisoner exchange. LeGrand James Wilson, he left a memoir post-war called The Confederate Soldier. Great account. He also retreated with Lee's army, not there for the photo. Spencer Glasgow Welch, doesn't appear to be any of the three men. Let's move on to some other guys. McNewer Ritter Lewis, Chief Surgeon, Pickett's Division. Don't have the greatest copy photo of him. Doesn't appear to be any of the three men. I think he retreated with Lee's army, so he didn't stay behind. John Henry McCaden stayed behind with Lee's army, was certainly a surgeon that was on the field of Gettysburg post-battle. Doesn't appear to be any of the three men. Bottom of the nose doesn't match. Other facial features don't match at all. John Francis Schaffner looks a little bit like man on right. We'll go back to him later. Frank Patterson, 2nd North Carolina Battalion. Could be man at right. Have a greater look. John B. Fontaine doesn't appear to be any of the men. David E. Ewart, certainly not one of them. William Proby Young, 4th Georgia Infantry, doesn't appear to be any of the three men. Also, Simon Baruch, our blue-eyed guy. Early war photo of him shows a slight beard, doesn't appear to be any of the three men. Also, with Baruch's memoirs, he would have left an account that he was photographed by the Brady and Company, certainly famous photographers, Brady and Company. Let's look at a few more guys. North Carolina surgeons. Now, these were plates that were published in year 1901 with the North Carolina accounts of all the regiments that fought in the Civil War, both Eastern and Western theater troops. So, with these guys, I know the regiments fought at Gettysburg. I don't know if they personally were there. I just gathered their images at the last minute, hoping that I might find a match, so not really sure with any of these guys if they stay behind after the fact. They don't appear on my vast list that I've been gathering for about 5 years now with names and names. So, unfortunately, I have about 88 guys that I am looking for. I only have names. I've searched high and low on the internet on every place I could look for. So, this is an alphabetical order by last name. If any of you out there are watching this production, if you know of the whereabouts of these individuals, these doctors, they were prominent guys if they survived into the post-war era in their county or wherever they lived the end of their years. I'll go from, this is the list from A to the letter P, and I'll just leave it there for a second, and then I'll go to the next list of the last names of these doctors from P to Z. So again, if you might know the whereabouts or any post-war photos of any of these doctors, these are their respective regiments that they served with. So if you can help, please contact me by my email address that was at the beginning of the production. If you might possibly know of any photos that could be in historical societies throughout the United States, anything will help certainly, because I kind of feel that our three guys are certainly among these. Now, this is just my opinion. It doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to anything that I am telling you that I believe these three guys are surgeons or assistant surgeons. But I believe this is our best bet in finding them. So we're going to go to the man seated at left. Certainly Dr. Samuel Rush Sayers, only thing in common, brown eyes. Sayers had a full carpet on his face during wartime, so not the slight beard of the man seated at left. George L. Kirby, no, a long shot, doesn't look anything like him. He retreated with Lee's army but was captured and later spent only a couple of days with all the other surgeons that stayed behind with Lee's army. They were all released on November 21st, 1863. From Fort McHenry, they boarded a ship known as the Dove and were delivered down to Fort Monroe in Union hands at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. A flag of truce delivered them back to the Confederate lines. The reason the exchange did not take place right away was there was some kind of hostage situation holdup with a surgeon that was accused of murder in the western part of the state of Virginia, which is probably West Virginia today. But they were not finally exchanged only because the South had captured about 100 surgeons after their victory at Chickamauga in Georgia in September 1863. So the exchange was finally worked out, 1-for-1, more or less, where they exchanged the northern surgeons that stayed behind after the Battle of Chickamauga. So we're going to take a good look at Dr. John Samuel Apperson. He was aged 25 years old and 10 months at the time of Gettysburg. He does retreat with Lee's army, and he kept a journal throughout most of the war. Now, what's interesting is the journal's last entry is July 4th, 1863. He's retreating with the 2nd Confederate Army Corps' caravan of wagons, 17 miles long, screaming, cursing, crying wounded, pouring rain in the black of the night. The wagon train is held up because of attacks from Union General Kilpatrick's Federal cavalry. So, it might be possible that Apperson was captured by Kilpatrick's cavalry and brought back to Gettysburg with the other surgeons and assistant surgeons that stayed behind when the battle was over. Apperson kept a journal through most of the war, but there were gaps. He does not resume the journal until January of 1864. So we don't know where his whereabouts. After the Battle of Waynesboro, March 2nd, 1865, Jubal Early's army is destroyed. His wagon train was destroyed that had paper records, food supplies, mainly Sheridan's cavalry and army burns up Early's wagon train. So the historical record of John Samuel Apperson's whereabouts, I do not know where he is from July 4th to basically January 1864. So again, it's very possible Ears match correctly, notch in the ears. Beard line correct. Nose slightly different, but everybody's nose ages or changes as they age. So a little more about Apperson. In a book known as Confederate Faces, published by William Albaugh III, year 1970, photos of Confederates. This cased image showing John Samuel Apperson, hospital steward, Company D, 4th Virginia Infantry, Stonewall Brigade. Most likely an early war image, clean-shaven image of Apperson. So, with a paper note that was left with this image, it said April 12th, 1864. Now, it's possible that Apperson, who was from the area of Locust Grove, Virginia, Orange County, it's possible that he was visiting his parents and wrote the note then and put the note inside the cased image in case he did not survive the war. One thing I do know, studying about Civil War photography, was the Union blockade during the Civil War restricted supplies of photography chemicals, paper, supplies, brass for the frames, anything. So there were very few Confederate photographers operating in year 1864. So this most likely tells me that this is an early war image. Unfortunately, this was the worst reproduced photo in the book Confederate Faces. Everyone else was reproduced, or every other photo was reproduced pretty well. This one, unfortunately, too dark. The publisher probably should have approached Albaugh and said, hey, buy a new roll of Kodak film, get another photo of this. So this cased image is in a caretaker's collection in today's world. I don't know who has the image, but maybe in the future, if we can get a hold of the image, we can take a look at the better wartime nose of John Samuel Apperson. So this is a post-war photo. Apperson's second wife, Lizzie Black, the oldest daughter of his compatriot, Harvey Black. His first wife with Apperson, they produced 9 children. Second wife, Lizzie Black, they had 4 children. It's a good thing that they had so many kids, or he had so many kids, to save family photos. So, what do I see? This is the only other photo from this Spotsylvania Memory blog spot. You can go on to the internet yourself. You can look at the same photo. I've done nothing to alter this photo. It appears to me that he still might be wearing a pinky finger pincushion. So, could be smoking gun evidence that Apperson could be the centerman in the famous photo. Don't know. So, a photograph of myself. Skeletons in the closet. Laughing gas. Here, I am aged 25 and 4 months old at the Glory movie set. We had done some film shooting where I was a federal soldier in the photograph on the bottom right. I had long hair and a full beard. So, to not appear as the same guy on 2 different sides in this Hollywood film production, I cut my hair, cut the sideburns away from my beard to look like Centerman. So, remember, Apperson was aged 25 years and 10 months old at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. Certainly he had a ZZ Top type beard later in life. It would have been no problem for him at age 25 and 10 months to grow the beard as we see in Centerman in the famous Brady and Company photo. So let's take a look at the third man standing at right. This post-war image that was later hand-painted by the state of North Carolina to be published in these books in year 1901. All these plates were released. Almost a splitting image. Looks exact. Cheekbones exact. Nose almost exact. Ears looks good. Full beard. This could be my guy, Frank Patterson, age 38 and 9 months old in July 1863. From everything I can find, he retreated with Lee's army. So I'll have to go back and re-scrutinize the record and the paper trail, but as far as I know, he left with Lee's army, did not be there for the photo in July, probably July 15th, 1863. So sadly, heartbreak there. Appeared to be the guy I was looking for, but most likely not. Unfortunately, since these photos were published in year 1901 through the state of North Carolina, I have no idea if an original photo, untouched, might still be around in today's world. I doubt it. That was more than 120 years ago, so probably not there. Now, one of the interesting things about man standing on right is that the upper part of his body moved just slightly in the 10 or so seconds it would have taken for Brady's cameraman to expose and capture this image. Also, what we see here, the top of his hat frayed. It's not really frayed. What happened was when Brady and company later retouched the sky with whiteout, they brushed into his hat. So, an earlier version from the Lucian Fairchild stereo card, the hat in perfect condition. So we now know that the hat was hit with whiteout later when the artist retouched the glass negative. So let's take a good look at some other guys. Lariston H. Hill, age 26 and 5 months old in July 1863 at Gettysburg. Could be the man at right. Don't know, still haven't done photo facial sleuth. My best bet is the closest match could be Abner Embry McGarity, age 29 and 9 months old at Gettysburg. Everything seems to line up. The ears, the nose looks good. Cheekbones similar. Unfortunately, the other two guys, not really a match. LeGrand James Wilson, he retreated with Lee's army, not there. William Mabry Strickler, this photo came from Colorado, where Strickler later went to post-war, maybe to try to leave the state of Virginia and forget about the hardships of the U.S. Civil War. I like the eyes and the eyebrows. Look like they could be man at right, but certainly the ears and the nose don't match up. So, if these guys aren't surgeons or assistant surgeons, they're most likely a squad of prisoners that Union Army Captain Henry Blood. He left a journal from the war. He was detailed by the High Command to stay behind at Gettysburg with another captain named Willard Smith. Not the Apocalypse Now Willard Smith, but a captain during the Civil War. So, Captain Henry Blood left this account. July 12, 1863. Took a squad of prisoners of war and went to the Confederate hospital to assist in cleaning up and to bury the dead. Found them in a suffering condition. Left 10 prisoners for nurses. Thunder shower this afternoon. Now, on the 15th of July, Blood was on his way to Washington, D.C. to meet with Henry Halleck. Boarded the railroad train just a little bit east of Gettysburg. The railroad line was still severed by Jeb Stuart's cavalry, so he had to board the train a little bit east of Gettysburg. The train bridge, railroad bridge at Paint Branch Creek, just north of Washington, D.C., washed out. Had tough time getting there to D.C. But anyway, so if the 3 Confederate prisoners aren't surgeons or assistant surgeons, could have been these nurses detailed by Captain Henry Blood. So a few volumes that were very helpful in my 10-year study. Great book, Kent Masterson Brown, Retreat from Gettysburg. Phenomenal book. Great detail about the amount of pigs, cows, livestock collected by the Confederates in their invasion of Pennsylvania. A Strange and Blighted Land, Gettysburg, written by the late Gregory A. Coco. Great book. Vietnam War veteran Gregory A. Coco. Can't say enough great things about that book. Gettysburg, A Testing of Courage by Trudeau. Great volume. One volume. Has an appendix with all of the different regiments, both North and South, that fought at Gettysburg. So it was very handy and easy for me to know which regiments from the Army of Northern Virginia were present at the Battle of Gettysburg. Great book also written by my friend. Sadly, Harry Fans passed away back in year 2015. A great volume for this study. So, was this project a failure or success? Hard to say. One of the things I believe I did uncover was the identity of this unknown surgeon photographed and left at the Byerly Photographic Studio in Frederick, Maryland, October 1862 after the Battle of Antietam. Confederate wounded brought to the hospitals in Frederick. I now believe that this unknown CDV photo of this Confederate surgeon is John Francis Schaffner, at right, surgeon, 4th North Carolina Infantry. Certainly similar guy, most likely a new identity for this unknown man. Also, another one of the surgeon's images I looked at was this medical Philadelphia Pennsylvania, 1858, medical class photograph. A guy also photographed at left in the Lillian-Quist collection, now at the Library of Congress. This beautiful image of an unknown surgeon, glass plate ambrotype, dark cuffs on the sleeves and collar, colonel, certainly medical doctor with the CSA, probably most likely Dr. Leonidas Richmond from the state of Mississippi, 34th Mississippi Infantry Regiment. Now, the 34th Mississippi Infantry Regiment was not in General Lee's army, but fought in the Western Theater of the Civil War. So therefore, maybe this project wasn't such a failure. Maybe now have the identities of two unknown surgeons from the Lillian-Quist family collection, now housed forever at the Library of Congress. So, was centerman John Samuel Apperson, 1837 to 1908, passed away just days before his 71st birthday. Unknown. Man standing at right, possibly Abner Embry McGarity, born in 1832, passed on in year 1915 at age 83. Don't know. Want to thank many people for help with this production. And thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again.
waiting.